Eleanor Beatrice Andrews's blue eyes widened as the stagecoach rattled into White River, South Dakota, not from the dust clouds billowing around them or the unfamiliarity of this frontier town, but from the throbbing pain radiating from her swollen eye, a parting gift from the man she'd fled 3 states away. It was spring of 1878, and the Dakota Territory sprawled before her like an uncertain promise. The journey from Boston had been long, her body still aching from days of being jostled over rough terrain, but nothing compared to the pain of the bruise that bloomed across her face. She tugged her bonnet lower, wishing she could disappear entirely beneath its brim. "White River," the driver called, pulling back on the reins. "End of the line, folks." Eleanor clutched her single carpetbag tighter, her letters from Wade Thompson tucked safely inside. 6 months of correspondence, with a cattle rancher seeking a wife, had led to this moment. She'd sent a daguerreotype of herself taken before her eye had been blackened along with honest letters about her skills as a seamstress and cook, her dreams of having a family, and her desperate need to leave Boston behind. What she hadn't mentioned was the real reason for her escape: Edward Sullivan's increasingly violent temper after their broken engagement. The stagecoach lurched to a halt. Eleanor waited until the other passengers had disembarked before attempting to climb down, her legs unsteady after so many days of travel. "Need a hand, miss?" The driver offered his arm, then faltered when he caught sight of her face. His eyes widened slightly before he quickly masked his reaction. "Thank you," she murmured, accepting his assistance. Her boots touched the dusty ground of White River, and she fought to maintain her composure. This town would be her home now if Wade Thompson still wanted her. The settlement was modest but bustling with activity. A general store, saloon, small church, and assorted businesses lined the main street. Horses were hitched to posts while townspeople went about their business. Eleanor felt exposed standing alone beside the stagecoach, her carpetbag at her feet. She surveyed the crowd, wondering which man might be Wade Thompson. "Miss Andrews." She turned at the sound of her name, coming face to face with a tall man in a worn Stetson. His eyes were the color of worn leather, his face weathered from years under the sun. A thick mustache framed his upper lip, but it was the kindness in his expression that caught her attention. Despite his rugged appearance, there was a gentleness about him that made her breath catch. "Mr. Thompson?" she asked softly. He nodded, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. Then his eyes found her injury, and something fierce flashed across his features, not disgust or disappointment as she had feared, but a protective anger that surprised her. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. Eleanor looked away, shame coloring her cheeks. "An accident," she lied, the words bitter on her tongue. "The stagecoach hit a particularly rough patch, Miss Andrews," Wade interrupted gently, stepping closer. "I've seen my share of accidents on the frontier. That's no fall from a stagecoach." Her throat tightened. She had traveled thousands of miles to escape one man's violence. She wouldn't start her new life with more deception. "No," she admitted. "It wasn't an accident." Wade's jaw clenched and his hand tightened around his hat. For a terrible moment, Eleanor feared she had made a mistake in coming. Perhaps he would send her back, unwilling to take on a woman with troubles. Instead, he carefully reached for her carpetbag. "Miss Andrews, I promise you that's the last black eye you'll ever have. Not while I'm alive." The conviction in his voice made her eyes burn with unshed tears. It wasn't romantic, sweet talk, or even pity. It was a solemn vow from a man who looked like he kept his promises. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "My wagon's over yonder," he said, nodding toward a sturdy buckboard hitched to 2 chestnut horses. We've got a 15-mile ride to the ranch. Are you up for it today, or would you prefer to rest at the boarding house? Eleanor straightened her shoulders. I'd like to see my new home if that's all right. Something like admiration flickered in Wade's eyes. As you wish. Let's get you settled in the wagon then. As they walked across the street, Eleanor felt the stares of townsfolk following them. She kept her head high despite the bruise on her face. Wade led her to the wagon and helped her climb onto the wooden seat, handling her as carefully as if she were made of fine china. I should tell you, he said as he stowed her bag. The ranch isn't much compared to what you might be used to in Boston. It's 15 acres of grazing land, a modest house, barn, and some outbuildings. I've been working to make it comfortable, but— Mr. Thompson, Eleanor interrupted, finding her voice. I didn't come west expecting luxury. I came for a fresh start. Wade climbed up beside her and took the reins. Then that's what you'll have, Miss Andrews. A fresh start. He clicked his tongue and the horses pulled forward, leaving the town of White River behind. The wagon bumped along the rutted trail, and Eleanor held tightly to the wooden seat. Spring had painted the Dakota prairie in shades of green and gold, with clusters of wildflowers adding splashes of color. The sky stretched endlessly above them, a vast blue canvas unmarred by Boston's crowded buildings and smoke. How long have you lived in White River? Eleanor asked, breaking the silence between them. 6 years, Wade replied. Came out after the war with not much more than the clothes on my back and a dream of owning land. Worked as a ranch hand until I saved enough to stake my claim. Been building it up ever since. The war changed many things, she observed quietly. Wade nodded, his profile strong against the horizon. Lost my brother at Gettysburg. Made me realize life's too short to not chase after what you want. And what is it you want, Mr. Thompson? The question slipped out before she could stop it. He glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. Peace. A good piece of land, someone to share it with. He cleared his throat. Your letters, they spoke of wanting the same. Eleanor nodded, remembering the careful words she had written by lamplight. I meant what I wrote. I want a home, children someday, a place where I belong. And the man who did that to your face? His question was gentle but direct. She stiffened slightly. He has no claim on me if that's your concern. We were engaged, but I broke it off when— Her voice faltered. When I realized what kind of man he truly was. Does he know where you've gone? No, I left without a word, traveled under my mother's maiden name until I reached St. Louis. She hesitated. Mr. Thompson, if my situation causes you to reconsider— It doesn't, he said firmly. But I want you to know you're safe here. The nearest law is Sheriff Collins in White River, and he's a good man. And my nearest neighbors, the Hendersons, are just 3 miles down the road. The rest of the journey passed with Wade pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area. Eleanor found herself relaxing as he spoke, his deep voice somehow soothing her frayed nerves. He didn't press her for details about her past, and for that she was grateful. By late afternoon, they crested a gentle hill, and Wade pulled the horses to a stop. There it is, he said, a hint of pride in his voice. Thompson Ranch. Eleanor's eyes followed his gaze to the valley below. A sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney sat nestled against a backdrop of cottonwood trees. A barn and corral stood nearby, with cattle grazing in the distance. A small creek wound its way through the property, catching the sunlight like a ribbon of gold. It's beautiful, she breathed and meant it. After the cramped confines of Boston tenements, the openness of this place felt like freedom. Wade's shoulders relaxed slightly at her approval. It's not much, but it's home. They continued down the hill, and as they drew closer, Eleanor could see the details Wade had added to make the place more than just a bachelor's shelter. Window boxes waited for flowers, The porch had a swing hanging from sturdy chains, and smoke curled invitingly from the chimney. Martha Henderson comes by once a week to help with the deeper cleaning, Wade explained as he brought the wagon to a halt. She was here yesterday getting things ready. Alina nodded, suddenly nervous again as the reality of her situation sank in. She had traveled across the country to marry a man she knew only through letters. Now she was at his isolated ranch, miles from town, with a face that showed the world she was already someone's victim. Wade must have sensed her apprehension. He climbed down from the wagon and came around to her side, but instead of helping her down immediately, he stood looking up at her. "Miss Andrews, before we go inside, I want to make something clear. The letters between us mentioned marriage, but I want you to know there's no obligation. You can stay as my guest until you decide what you want. If that's to return to town or move on, I'll understand." His eyes, earnest and unwavering, held hers. "I'm not the kind of man who believes in forced arrangements." Relief washed through her. "That's very kind, Mr. Thompson." "Not kindness, just decency." He offered his hand. "Now, would you like to see the house?" Alina placed her hand in his, noting the calluses that spoke of years of hard work. His grip was firm but gentle as he helped her down. Up close, she could smell leather and soap and something uniquely him, clean and masculine. The interior of the cabin was simple but comfortable. A main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a solid table, several chairs, and a stone fireplace. A rocking chair sat by the hearth with a half-finished book on a small table beside it. 2 doors led off from the main room, one to Wade's bedroom, he explained, and the other to a small room he had prepared for her. "It's not much," he said, showing her the space with its narrow bed, chest of drawers, and small window overlooking the creek. "But I thought you might appreciate having your own space." Alina felt tears prick her eyes at his thoughtfulness. Edward had never considered her comfort or privacy. "It's perfect," she said, running her fingers over the patchwork quilt that covered the bed. "Martha Henderson made the quilt," Wade explained. "Said no woman should sleep without a proper covering." He shifted his weight. "I'll let you get settled. There's water in the pitcher if you'd like to wash up. I'll start on supper." He left her alone, closing the door softly behind him. Alina sank onto the bed, exhaustion from her journey finally catching up to her. The quiet of the prairie seeped through the window, so different from Boston's constant noise. She could hear Wade moving in the main room, the clatter of pans, and the steady rhythm of a knife against a cutting board. She unpacked her meager possessions, arranging them in the chest of drawers. The bruise on her face throbbed dully, a reminder of what she'd left behind. Alina poured water from the pitcher into the basin and carefully washed away the dust of travel, wincing as she dabbed at her swollen eye. When she emerged from the bedroom, Wade was setting the table. He had removed his hat and coat and rolled up his sleeves to reveal strong forearms tanned by the sun. He looked up as she approached. "Feel better?" "Yes, thank you." She glanced at the pot simmering on the stove. "Can I help with anything? You're probably tired from your journey." "Why don't you sit?" He pulled out a chair for her. "Mr. Thompson, if we're to live under the same roof, I'd prefer to carry my weight." She moved toward the stove. "What are you making?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Rabbit stew, nothing fancy but filling." Alina nodded and began looking through cupboards until she found plates and cups. She set these on the table while Wade stirred the stew. They worked in companionable silence, moving around each other with surprising ease. Over dinner, Wade told her more about the ranch, the 50 head of cattle he managed, his 2 horses, the vegetable garden out back that needed tending, and his plans to expand when possible. "You have help with the cattle?" Alina asked. Young Thomas Riley helps me during calving season and with the bigger jobs. He's 16, son of the blacksmith in town. Wade broke off a piece of cornbread. Most days, though, it's just me. It seems like a lot of work for one person. Wade shrugged. It keeps me busy. Though I'll admit, there are times when the quiet gets to be too much. He looked at her directly. That's part of why I wrote that advertisement. Wasn't just looking for help around the place. Eleanor appreciated his honesty. I understand loneliness, Mr. Thompson. Something passed between them, then a recognition of shared solitude that needed no further explanation. After dinner, Eleanor insisted on washing the dishes despite Wade's protests. As she worked, she noticed him watching her from his chair by the fire, his expression unreadable. When she finished, she dried her hands on a towel and joined him by the hearth. "Miss Andrews," he began, then paused. "Eleanor, if I may." "You may," she said softly. "I know this is forward, but I need to ask about your eye." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Is there someone who might come looking for you? Someone I should be prepared for?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. "Edward Sullivan," she admitted. "My former fiancé, but I don't think he would travel this far. His business keeps him in Boston." "What kind of business?" "He owns several textile factories." Eleanor stared into the fire. "We met at church. He seemed charming, attentive. My parents were pleased with the match. His family has money and connections." She twisted her hands in her lap. "The first time he hit me was 3 months into our engagement. I had spoken to a male cousin at a family gathering, and Edward accused me of flirting." Wade's expression darkened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. "He apologized afterward, blamed it on too much wine, promised it would never happen again." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I believed him, until it happened again and again." She touched her bruised face gently. "This last time was because I suggested postponing the wedding. I knew then I had to leave." "You did the right thing," Wade said quietly. "My parents didn't think so. They said I was throwing away a good match, that all men had tempers sometimes." She swallowed hard. "My mother told me to be more careful about provoking him." Wade's hands clenched into fists. "That's not how men treat women they claim to love." "No," Eleanor agreed. "It's not." She took a deep breath. "I used money I'd saved from my seamstress work to buy a ticket west. I saw your advertisement in the newspaper and wrote to you because your letters seemed kind, honest." "I'm not an educated man," Wade said, "but I know right from wrong. What he did was wrong." The simple conviction in his voice brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Thank you for saying that." Wade stood suddenly, uncomfortable with her tears. "It's getting late. You must be tired from your journey." Eleanor nodded, rising from her chair. "Yes, it's been a long day. We can talk more tomorrow about arrangements, whether you want to stay or—" He left the sentence unfinished. "Good night, Mr. Thompson." "Wade," he corrected gently. "If I'm to call you Eleanor." "Good night, Wade. Sleep well, Eleanor." In the privacy of her small room, Eleanor changed into her nightgown and slipped beneath the patchwork quilt. Outside, she could hear the gentle rushing of the creek and the occasional lowing of cattle in the distance. The sounds of the prairie night were foreign but somehow comforting. Her thoughts turned to Wade Thompson. He was nothing like the refined businessmen of Boston, with their tailored suits and manicured hands. Wade's strength came from years of honest work, his directness from a life without pretense. She thought of his promise that she would never suffer another black eye while he lived, and for the first time since leaving Boston, Eleanor felt truly safe. She closed her eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and golden sunlight streaming through her window. For a moment, Eleanor was disoriented, the unfamiliar room confusing her sleep-addled mind. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back: the arrival in White River, meeting Wade, coming to the ranch. She dressed quickly in a simple blue calico dress, pinned her hair into a neat bun, and stepped into the main room. It was empty, but a fire crackled in the hearth and a pot of coffee simmered on the stove. Through the window, she could see Wade in the corral with a chestnut horse, brushing its coat with long, steady strokes. Eleanor poured herself a cup of coffee and stepped onto the porch. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wildflowers and grass. She took a deep breath, savoring the openness of the land spreading before her. Wade looked up from his task and raised a hand in greeting. He said something to the horse, patted its neck, and then made his way toward the house. "You're up early," he said, removing his hat as he approached. "Sleep well, better than I have in months," Eleanor admitted. "The quiet is peaceful." Wade smiled, and Eleanor noticed how it transformed his serious face, softening the lines at the corners of his eyes. "Breakfast," he suggested. "I'm no great cook, but I can manage bacon and eggs." "I'll cook," she offered. "It's the least I can do." Together they returned to the kitchen. Eleanor explored the pantry while Wade set the table. She found eggs, bacon, flour, and other basics, and soon had a simple but hearty breakfast prepared. They ate together, the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. "What are your plans for today?" Eleanor asked. "Need to check the north pasture fence. Had some trouble with coyotes getting to the calves." Wade took a sip of coffee. "After that, I thought I might show you around the property if you're interested." "I'd like that." After breakfast, Wade rode out to check the fences while Eleanor tackled the dishes. With that done, she explored the house more thoroughly in daylight. It was simple but well built, with careful attention to the details that made a house comfortable. The furnishings were plain but sturdy, and everything was meticulously clean. Martha Henderson's influence, no doubt. Eleanor found a basket of mending by Wade's chair and settled in with needle and thread. The familiar work calmed her, and by the time Wade returned, she had repaired 3 shirts and a pair of pants. "You didn't have to do that," he said when he noticed her work. "I wanted to," she replied, setting aside the mending. "I'm a good seamstress. It's one skill I can offer right away." Wade's expression softened. "Thank you." He glanced outside. "Still want that tour of the property?" They walked the boundaries of the ranch together, Wade pointing out landmarks and explaining his plans for expansion. Eleanor listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest. The bruise on her face was still visible, but in the clean Dakota air, surrounded by open prairie, it seemed less significant, a reminder of what she'd left behind rather than a mark of shame. "This creek runs year-round," Wade explained as they paused by the water. "Never runs dry, even in the worst droughts, makes this land more valuable than most in these parts." Eleanor knelt and dipped her fingers in the clear water. "It's beautiful." "It is," Wade agreed, but when she glanced up, he was looking at her, not the creek. He quickly averted his gaze when their eyes met. "We should head back. Storm clouds brewing in the west." Sure enough, dark clouds were building on the horizon. They walked back to the house as a cool wind began to pick up, carrying the scent of rain. They reached the porch just as the first heavy drops began to fall. "Perfect timing," Wade said, holding the door open for her. Inside, they settled into a routine as the rain pattered against the roof. Eleanor found potatoes and salt pork in the pantry and began preparing a simple dinner. Wade sat at the table cleaning his revolver, a task he explained he did regularly to keep the mechanism working smoothly. "Have you had trouble with outlaws?" Eleanor asked, thinking of the dime novels she'd read about the Wild West. Wade shook his head. "Not much. White River's pretty peaceful compared to some places, Had some cattle rustlers last spring, but Sheriff Collins tracked them down. He reassembled the gun with practiced movements. Still, out here, it pays to be prepared. The rain continued through dinner, drumming steadily on the roof. The sound was soothing, creating a cocoon of comfort around the cabin. After they ate, Wade surprised Alina by producing a worn chess set. "You play?" he asked, setting up the pieces. "My father taught me," she replied, sitting across from him at the table, "though I haven't played in years." "My grandfather taught me," Wade said. "Said it helped a man think 3 steps ahead." He smiled wryly. "Not sure it's worked for me, but I enjoy the game." They played by lamplight as the storm intensified outside, thunder occasionally rumbling in the distance. Alina proved to be a worthy opponent, capturing several of Wade's pieces with strategic moves that made him raise his eyebrows in surprise. "Checkmate," she said eventually, sliding her queen into position. Wade stared at the board in disbelief, then laughed, a rich, warm sound that filled the cabin. "Well played, Alina. I haven't been beaten that soundly in years." The use of her first name felt natural now, the formality between them dissolving as they shared this quiet evening. "Another game," she suggested. Wade reset the board and they played again, this time with Wade paying closer attention to her strategy. The rain drummed steadily on the roof, and the lamp cast a golden glow over the table. It was simple, this moment of connection over a game of chess, but Alina felt something shift between them, a tentative trust beginning to form. The next morning dawned clear and bright after the storm. Alina woke to the smell of coffee and biscuits. She dressed quickly and found Wade already at the stove, his sleeves rolled up as he flipped bacon in a cast-iron skillet. "Good morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Thought I'd get an early start today." "You should have woken me," Alina said, moving to help him with breakfast. "You looked peaceful. Didn't want to disturb you." There was something gentle in his voice that made her pause. They ate breakfast together, planning the day ahead. Wade needed to ride the property boundaries again to check for damage after the storm, and Alina offered to tackle the vegetable garden, which had been somewhat neglected. "Be careful in this heat," Wade cautioned as he prepared to leave. "The sun gets fierce by midday." "I will," she promised. After he rode out, Alina changed into her oldest dress and found gardening tools in a small shed behind the house. The garden was overgrown but not beyond salvation. She spent the morning weeding, turning soil and identifying the plants that were still viable: tomatoes, beans, carrots, and potatoes. The work was hard but satisfying, connecting her to this land in a tangible way. By midday, her muscles ached and sweat dampened her dress, but half the garden was cleared and ready for new plantings. Alina sat back on her heels, pushing a strand of hair from her face, and realized she felt more content than she had in months. Wade returned as she was preparing lunch, a simple meal of cold ham, bread, and pickles from the pantry. He washed up at the pump outside before joining her at the table. "The garden looks good," he remarked, "better than it has in a long time." "It has potential," Alina replied. "With some care, it could produce quite a bit of food. I made a list of seeds we might want to purchase next time you're in town." Wade nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're thinking of staying then?" The question hung between them. Alina set down her cup carefully. "I'd like to if you'll have me." "As my wife?" Wade asked directly. Alina met his gaze. "We barely know each other," she said softly. "But I feel safe here with you, Wade. I'd like the chance to see if what we have could grow into something more." Wade considered her words, then nodded slowly. "That seems wise. No need to rush into marriage until we're sure." He cleared his throat. "But as for staying, this is your home for as long as you want it to be." Relief washed through her. "Thank you." After lunch, Wade showed Alina the barn and introduced her to the animals: two workhorses, a milk cow, and a small flock of chickens. He explained the daily routines of caring for the livestock, and Alina listened attentively, determined to learn everything she could about ranch life. "Have you always wanted to be a rancher?" she asked as they walked back toward the house. Wade considered the question. "Not always. Thought I might be a teacher once before the war." He glanced at her. "I like books, learning, but after Gettysburg." He trailed off, his expression distant. "Needed space. Open sky. Land of my own." Alina understood. She had seen the hollow-eyed veterans in Boston, men who returned from the war forever changed. "And do you find peace here most days?" he said simply. Then, changing the subject, "What about you? Did you always want to be a mail-order bride?" The question could have been mocking, but his tone was gentle, curious. "No," Alina admitted with a small smile. "I dreamed of being a teacher too, actually. I even attended normal school for a year. But then my father fell ill and the family needed my income." She looked out across the prairie. "When Edward began courting me, it seemed like a way out of financial struggle. My parents were so pleased with the match." "And now," Wade asked quietly, "what do you want now?" Alina considered the question. No one had asked her that in a long time. "Safety," she said finally. "A home, perhaps someday love." She glanced at him uncertainly. "Is that foolish?" "No," Wade said, "not foolish at all." That evening, after supper, Wade brought out a book of poetry: Wordsworth, dog-eared and well-read. He seemed almost shy as he handed it to Alina. "Thought you might enjoy this. Not much for entertainment out here, but I've collected a few books over the years." Alina opened it carefully, surprised and touched by this glimpse into Wade's inner life. "You enjoy poetry?" "My mother taught me to read with poetry," he explained. "Said it put music in language." They sat by the fire, Alina reading aloud from the book while Wade listened, his face relaxed in the firelight. The simple pleasure of shared words created another bridge between them, fragile but growing stronger. Days passed, falling into a comfortable rhythm. Alina learned the routines of ranch life, adding her own touches to make the cabin more homelike. She planted flowers in the window boxes Wade had built, hung curtains she sewed from fabric purchased on their trip to town, and expanded the vegetable garden until it flourished with new life. Wade watched these transformations with quiet appreciation. Alina sometimes caught him observing her when he thought she wasn't looking, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with a kind of wondering admiration, as though he couldn't quite believe she was real. The bruise on her face faded, green then yellow then gone, but the memory of Wade's promise remained. "That's the last black eye you'll ever have." He had kept his word, treating her with unfailing respect and consideration. In the month since her arrival, he had never raised his voice, never made demands, never touched her without permission. It was during their second trip to White River that Alina began to understand just how deeply Wade was respected in the community. As they walked down the main street, townspeople greeted him warmly, stopping to chat or offer news. Wade introduced Alina to everyone they met, his hand resting lightly on her back, not possessive, but protective. "Thompson saved my boy when he fell through the ice last winter," the blacksmith, Mr. Riley, told Alina as Wade discussed horseshoes with Thomas. "Pulled him out and got him warmed up before the cold could take him. Man's got ice water in his veins when there's trouble." Similar stories emerged throughout the day, Wade bringing supplies to the widow Johnson during a blizzard, helping the pastor repair the church roof, organizing neighbors when the Hendersons' barn burned down. In each telling, Alina saw the same theme. Wade Thompson was a man who could be counted on. "You never mentioned any of this," she said as they drove home, the wagon loaded with supplies. Wade looked uncomfortable. Nothing worth mentioning, just being neighborly. But it was more than that, and Alina knew it. The people of White River didn't just respect Wade, they trusted him. And she was beginning to understand why. Summer arrived in full force, bringing long days of sunshine and occasional thunderstorms that rolled dramatically across the prairie. The garden flourished under Alina's care, providing fresh vegetables for their table. She learned to milk the cow, collected eggs each morning, and even helped with some of the lighter ranch work. One evening in late June, they sat on the porch after supper, watching fireflies dance above the grass. The air was warm, fragrant with wildflowers and the mint Alina had planted beside the steps. "I got a letter from Martha Henderson today," Wade said, breaking a comfortable silence. "They're having a barn raising and social this Saturday. Thought we might attend if you're interested." Alina smiled. "I'd like that. People will talk," Wade warned, "about us living here without being married." "Let them talk," Alina replied. "We know the truth of things between us." Wade nodded, but she could see he was troubled. "Still, I don't want your reputation damaged." "Wade," Alina said gently, "my reputation was left behind in Boston. Here I'm just Alina Andrews learning to be a rancher's." She hesitated, uncertain how to define herself. "Partner," Wade suggested. The word felt right, equal, respectful. "Yes, partner." Saturday arrived clear and bright. Alina wore her best dress, a dark blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Wade dressed in his Sunday clothes, his hair still damp from washing. He helped Alina into the wagon, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The Henderson farm was alive with activity when they arrived. Men were already raising the frame of the new barn, calling instructions and encouragement to each other. Women bustled around tables laden with food, children darted between adults, and somewhere a fiddle played a lively tune. Martha Henderson, a plump, energetic woman in her 50s, rushed to greet them. "Alina, Wade, so glad you could come." She embraced Alina warmly. "You look positively blooming, my dear. Ranch life must agree with you." Wade excused himself to help with the barn raising, leaving Alina with Martha and the other women. At first, Alina felt self-conscious, aware of curious glances and whispered conversations. But Martha kept her close, introducing her to everyone and including her in the preparations for the midday meal. "Don't mind the gossips," Martha said quietly as they arranged pies on a table. "They'll find something new to talk about soon enough." "I don't care what they say about me," Alina replied, "but I worry about Wade's reputation." Martha laughed. "Wade Thompson could give lessons to saints on proper behavior. Everyone knows that." Her expression grew serious. "He's different since you came, Alina, happier. I haven't seen him smile so much since before the war." The meal was served at noon, with tables set up in the shade of large oak trees. Wade found Alina as people began to gather, his shirt damp with honest sweat from the morning's work. "The frame's up," he reported, accepting the plate she handed him. "Should have the roof on by sunset." They sat together among the other ranchers and farmers, listening to news and stories from around the territory. Alina found herself drawn into conversations about preserving vegetables and the best way to keep flies out of the kitchen, practical knowledge the women willingly shared with the newcomer. After the meal, the tables were cleared for dancing. The fiddler was joined by a man with a banjo, and soon lively music filled the air. Couples took to the makeshift dance floor, laughing and calling to each other as they moved through familiar patterns. "Would you care to dance?" Wade asked, offering his hand to Alina. She hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I'd love to." Wade led her to the dance floor, one hand at the small of her back, the other holding hers carefully. "I should warn you," he said with a rueful smile, "I'm not much of a dancer." "Neither am I," Alina admitted. We can be terrible together. But they weren't terrible. After an initial awkwardness, they found their rhythm, moving together as if they'd been dancing for years. Wade was more graceful than he'd claimed, guiding her through the steps with surprising confidence. Alina felt lighter than she had in years, twirling beneath the summer sky in the arms of a man who made her feel safe. As the afternoon progressed, they danced several more times, but also separated to socialize with others. Alina found herself in a circle of women discussing everything from childbirth to politics, surprised by the forthright opinions and practical wisdom of these frontier wives. "Your Wade's a good man," said Rebecca Collins, the sheriff's wife, as they watched the men raising the last roof beam. "One of the best in the territory. Many a young lady had her cap set for him before you came along." "We're not officially," Alina began. Rebecca waved away her protest. "Doesn't matter. Anyone with eyes can see how it is between you two," she smiled kindly. "It's a good match, Alina. You both deserve happiness." By sunset, the barn was raised and lanterns were lit for the evening's celebration. More food appeared along with jugs of cider and home-brewed beer. The music grew livelier, the dancing more energetic. Wade found Alina as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Ready to head home?" he asked. "It's a fair ride back and it'll be dark soon." Home. The word resonated with Alina. The ranch had indeed become home in the weeks since her arrival. She nodded, suddenly eager to be back in the quiet sanctuary they shared. They said their goodbyes and drove back in companionable silence, the wagon rolling smoothly along the familiar trail. The prairie stretched around them, silvered by moonlight, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage and grass. "Did you enjoy yourself?" Wade asked. "Very much," Alina replied. "Your neighbors are good people." "They liked you," he said. "Martha Henderson told me she hasn't seen anyone take to ranch life as naturally as you have." Alina felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "It's not so different from what I imagined. Hard work, but honest. Satisfying." They fell silent again until the ranch came into view, the cabin a dark silhouette against the night sky. Wade helped Alina down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. They stood close in the moonlight, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. "Alina," Wade began, his voice low. She looked up at him, her heart beating faster. "Yes, I." He hesitated, then seemed to change his mind. "I should tend to the horses." Alina nodded, disappointment and relief mingling in her chest. "Of course, I'll make some coffee." Inside, she moved around the familiar kitchen, lighting the lamp and stoking the banked fire in the hearth. By the time Wade came in, she had coffee brewing and her emotions under better control. They sat at the table, mugs of coffee between them, each lost in thought. Finally, Wade cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said, not quite meeting her eyes, "about us, about our arrangement." Alina's hands tightened around her mug. "Yes, it's been nearly 2 months since you arrived." Wade looked up then, his expression earnest. "I know we agreed to give ourselves time to know each other better before making any decisions about marriage." "We did," Alina agreed softly. "The thing is," Wade continued, "I find myself—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I find myself caring for you more than I expected to." Alina's heart quickened. "I care for you too, Wade." He reached across the table and took her hand in his. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight, just want you to know where my thoughts are heading. If you need more time, or if you've decided this isn't what you want after all." "Wade," Alina interrupted gently. "I haven't changed my mind. I came here looking for a fresh start, yes, but also for a partner, someone to build a life with." She turned her hand to clasp his. "I think I may have found him." The smile that spread across Wade's face transformed him, erasing the lines of worry and lighting his eyes with quiet joy. "I'd like to court you properly, Alina, not just as a mail-order arrangement, but as a man courts a woman he admires." Alina smiled. "I'd like that very much." And so began a proper courtship, though they continued to live under the same roof. Wade brought Alina wildflowers he found on his rides around the property. She baked his favorite desserts and sewed him a new shirt for Sundays. In the evenings, they read to each other from Wade's small collection of books, their chairs drawn closer to the fire than before. They still maintained separate bedrooms and proper boundaries, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of growing feelings that made every shared glance, every accidental touch, more meaningful. July brought blistering heat that turned the prairie golden. The days were long and demanding, with endless chores to keep the ranch running. But the evenings were theirs, spent on the porch watching the sunset or walking along the creek in the cooling twilight. It was during one such evening walk that Wade first kissed Alina. They had paused by the creek, discussing plans to build a small footbridge across it before winter, when Wade suddenly fell silent, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Alina," he said softly, stepping closer, "may I kiss you?" The simple question, the asking of permission, moved her deeply. Edward had never asked, had simply taken what he wanted, but Wade waited, patient and respectful, for her answer. "Yes," she whispered. Wade's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as he leaned down to press his lips to hers. The kiss was soft, almost reverent, and over too soon. He drew back slightly, his eyes searching hers for any sign of discomfort or regret. Instead, Alina reached up and drew him back to her, kissing him with all the feeling that had been building in her heart these past months. Wade responded with equal fervor, his arms encircling her waist, holding her as if she were precious beyond measure. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, Wade pressed his forehead to hers. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Alina Andrews," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I'm already there, Wade Thompson," she replied. They returned to the cabin hand in hand, the air between them vibrant with possibility. That night, Alina lay awake for hours, replaying the kiss in her mind, marveling at how different it felt to be touched with tenderness rather than possession. August brought the first whispers of autumn cooler nights, a shifting quality to the light. Wade and Alina fell into a rhythm of work and courtship, learning each other's habits and histories. Wade told Alina about his childhood in Missouri, his parents who had died of fever when he was 16, his brother lost at Gettysburg. Alina shared stories of Boston, her dreams of teaching, the slow erosion of her spirit during her time with Edward. He started with small criticisms. She explained one evening as they sat on the porch. "My dress was too bright, I laughed too loudly in public, I spoke to his business associates too familiarly. Each time I changed to please him, thinking it would be enough." She sighed. "By the time he first hit me, I barely recognized myself anymore." Wade took her hand, his expression solemn. "You found your way back. I'm finding it," she corrected softly. "Every day here, I remember a little more of who I was before him, who I want to be." Wade lifted her hand to his lips. "I like who you are right now, Alina Andrews." In mid-August, they made another trip to White River for supplies. While Wade discussed a cattle sale with a buyer from Sioux Falls, Alina visited the general store to purchase fabric for curtains and a new tablecloth. As she was examining bolts of gingham, she overheard two women talking in the next aisle. "Living out there with him for months now, not a wedding ring in sight," one said in a stage whisper. "It's scandalous if you ask me." "Martha Henderson says they're courting properly," the other replied. Says Thompson's a gentleman through and through. Gentleman or not, no decent woman lives with a man without benefit of marriage. Makes you wonder what she left behind in Boston. That black eye she arrived with tells a story, I'll wager. Alina's cheeks burned with shame and anger. She set down the fabric and turned to face the gossips directly. "Good afternoon, ladies," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I believe you're discussing me." The women had the grace to look embarrassed. "Miss Andrews, we didn't see you there," the first woman stammered. "Clearly." Alina drew herself up to her full height. "Since you seem interested in my story, I'll tell you plainly. I came west to escape a man who believed he owned me, who used his fists to prove it. Wade Thompson has shown me nothing but respect and kindness. Yes, we live under the same roof but with separate rooms and proper behavior." She took a breath. "Judge me if you must, but do so with facts rather than speculation." The women stared at her, speechless. Alina nodded politely and returned to selecting her fabric, though her hands trembled slightly. When she approached the counter to pay, the shopkeeper's wife, Mrs. Bennet, smiled warmly at her. "That was well said, Miss Andrews," she remarked quietly. "Those two have wagged their tongues about everyone in White River at some point. About time someone stood up to them." Alina managed a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Bennet." "For what it's worth," the older woman continued as she wrapped Alina's purchases, "most folks think highly of you and Mr. Thompson. Anyone with eyes can see you're good for each other." Alina's encounter with the gossips troubled her on the ride home, though she didn't mention it to Wade. That evening, as they sat by the fire drinking coffee, she found herself considering their situation from an outside perspective. "Wade," she began carefully, "have you given any more thought to our future?" He set down his cup, his expression serious. "Every day." And Wade moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "Alina Andrews, I love you. These past months have been the happiest of my life. I'd be honored if you would agree to be my wife." Though she had been expecting this conversation, the simple sincerity of his proposal brought tears to her eyes. "Are you certain? Once we're married, there's no going back." "I've never been more certain of anything," Wade assured her. "But if you need more time, no," Alina interrupted, squeezing his hands. "No more time. I love you, Wade Thompson. Yes, I'll marry you." The joy that blazed across Wade's face was answer enough, but he sealed their engagement with a kiss that left Alina breathless, and certain she had made the right decision. They agreed to a simple ceremony at the White River Church in 2 weeks' time. The next day, they rode to town to speak with the pastor and begin preparations. News of their engagement spread quickly, and Alina was touched by the genuine congratulations they received from most of the townsfolk. Even the gossips from the general store offered stiff but polite good wishes. Martha Henderson insisted on hosting a small gathering after the ceremony, and Mrs. Bennet helped Alina select fabric for a wedding dress, a pale blue cotton that complemented her eyes. "Not traditional, I know," Alina said as she examined the material, "but I think it suits me better than white." "It's perfect," Mrs. Bennet assured her, "and it will be practical for after the wedding, too." The following 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparations. Alina sewed her wedding dress in the evenings, while Wade made improvements to the cabin, building shelves for her books, repairing a leak in the roof, and constructing a proper wardrobe for their bedroom. The thought both thrilled and nervous Alina. She had known the physical side of marriage with Edward, but it had never been gentle or loving. Wade's kisses and embraces promised something entirely different, a sharing rather than a taking. The night before their wedding, they sat on the porch swing watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would be their last night in this arrangement. Afterward, They would truly be husband and wife in every sense. Are you nervous about tomorrow? Wade asked, his arm around her shoulders. A little, Alina admitted, but not about marrying you, that part feels right. She hesitated, then decided to be honest. I'm more nervous about after. Wade's arm tightened slightly around her. Alina, I want you to know something. Marriage gives certain rights, but I don't ever want to claim them if you're unwilling or uncomfortable. We'll take things as slowly as you need. His understanding brought tears to her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, resting her head against his shoulder. I don't think I'll need much time. I trust you, Wade. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, a perfect September morning. Alina dressed in her blue gown, her hair arranged in a simple but elegant style with white flowers tucked into the coiled braids. Wade had ridden ahead to the church, leaving Alina to follow with the Hendersons, who had come to escort her. You look beautiful, my dear, Martha said, her eyes misty as she helped Alina with the final touches. Wade won't know what hit him. The White River Church was small but filled with well-wishers when Alina arrived. She paused at the doorway, suddenly overwhelmed by the journey that had brought her here, from a frightened woman with a bruised face to a bride confident in her choice and her future. Then she saw Wade standing at the altar, tall and handsome in his Sunday suit, his eyes finding hers across the crowded room. The love in his gaze gave her the courage to step forward, making her way toward the man who had promised her safety and given her so much more. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, the pastor's words emphasizing partnership and mutual respect as much as love. When Wade slipped the simple gold band onto Alina's finger, his hand was steady, his eyes never leaving hers. With this ring, I thee wed, he said, his deep voice clear in the hushed church. And I promise to honor, cherish, and protect you all the days of my life. Alina repeated her vows with equal conviction, her heart full as she placed a matching ring on Wade's finger. I promise to stand by you, support you, and love you all the days of my life. By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife, the pastor declared. Mr. Thompson, you may kiss your bride. Wade's kiss was gentle but certain, a promise of the life they would build together. When they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, Alina felt a sense of rightness, of coming home. The celebration at the Henderson farm was joyous, with plenty of food, music, and dancing. Alina and Wade accepted congratulations from everyone in attendance, including Sheriff Collins, who pulled Wade aside for a moment. Just got word, Alina overheard him saying. That Boston fellow you asked me about, Sullivan. He's been making inquiries in St. Louis. Seems to be following your wife's trail west. Alina's blood ran cold. Edward was looking for her. Wade's expression darkened, but he kept his voice low as he responded. How recent? About 3 weeks ago. May have given up by now, but thought you should know, Wade nodded. Appreciate it, Sheriff. I'll keep an eye out. He returned to Alina's side, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Everything all right? She asked quietly. Fine, he assured her, squeezing her hand. Just some ranch business. Nothing to worry about today. Alina knew he wasn't telling her everything, but she trusted him enough to let it go for now. This was their wedding day, whatever trouble might be brewing could wait. As the sun began to set, Wade and Alina said their goodbyes and climbed into the decorated wagon for the ride home. Friends and neighbors cheered and called good wishes as they drove away, tin cans tied to the back of the wagon clattering merrily along the road. Mrs. Thompson, Wade said, his voice warm as he glanced at her. Has a nice sound to it. It does, Alina agreed, leaning against his shoulder. Much better than Miss Andrews ever did. When they arrived home, Wade surprised Alina by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, wife," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the main room. Eleanor looked around in amazement. While they'd been at the church and celebration, someone Martha Henderson, she guessed, had been busy. Fresh flowers sat on the table, new curtains hung at the windows, and the fireplace was laid ready to light. Most notably, Eleanor's few possessions had been moved from the small bedroom to the main one she would now share with Wade. "It's perfect," she said, turning to embrace her husband. "Absolutely perfect." Wade bent to kiss her, his arms encircling her waist. "Not quite perfect yet," he murmured against her lips, "but getting there." They moved around the cabin in a new dance, preparing for their first night as husband and wife. Wade lit the fire while Eleanor changed into her nightgown behind the privacy screen in their bedroom. When she emerged, Wade was waiting for her, having removed his jacket and boots, but still fully dressed otherwise. "I meant what I said last night," he told her quietly. "We take this as slowly as you need." Eleanor crossed the room to stand before him, her heart racing but her mind certain. "I'm not afraid, Wade, not of you." She reached up to touch his face. "I want to be your wife in every way." His eyes darkened with desire, but his touch remained gentle as he drew her into his arms. "I love you, Eleanor Thompson," he whispered, before claiming her lips in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. Later, lying in Wade's arms as moonlight streamed through the window, Eleanor marveled at the difference between what she had known before and what she had experienced tonight. Where Edward had demanded, Wade had asked. Where Edward had taken, Wade had given. Every touch, every kiss had been an act of mutual pleasure, a sharing of intimacy that left her feeling cherished rather than used. "What are you thinking?" Wade asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I'm happy," Eleanor replied honestly. "Happier than I ever thought possible." Wade pressed a kiss to her forehead. "That's all I want, your happiness." She snuggled closer to him, content in the knowledge that she had found not just safety, but love. Whatever challenges lay ahead, even Edward Sullivan's possible pursuit, they would face together. The weeks following their wedding settled into a new rhythm. The work of the ranch continued: cattle to tend, garden to harvest, preparations for winter to complete, but now with the added joy of sharing every aspect of their lives. They worked side by side during the day and slept in each other's arms at night, learning the intimate details that only spouses know about each other. Wade had nightmares sometimes, Eleanor discovered, reliving battles from the war that he rarely spoke about when awake. She learned to soothe him back to sleep with gentle words and touches. Wade, in turn, discovered that Eleanor hummed when she was content, often not realizing she was doing so until he commented on the pretty tune. September gave way to October, bringing cooler weather and spectacular sunsets that painted the prairie in gold and crimson. Eleanor preserved the last of the garden's bounty for winter, filling the cellar with jars of vegetables, fruits, and jams. Wade repaired fences and outbuildings, ensuring everything would withstand the harsh Dakota winter ahead. Though Wade never mentioned it directly, Eleanor noticed he was more vigilant since their wedding day. He kept his revolver closer at hand and often paused in his work to scan the horizon. She suspected it had something to do with the conversation she'd overheard with Sheriff Collins, but Wade seemed determined to protect her from whatever worry he carried. It was Martha Henderson who finally confirmed Eleanor's suspicions during a visit in late October. While Wade and John Henderson discussed cattle prices, Martha helped Eleanor hang quilts on the line to air. "Has Wade told you about the man from Boston?" Martha asked bluntly. Eleanor stilled, a quilt clutched in her hands. "Edward Sullivan." "Not directly, though I overheard something at our wedding." Martha pursed her lips. That man doesn't keep secrets from you out of disrespect, Alina. He's trying to spare you worry. What do you know, Martha? The older woman sighed. Sheriff Collins got word that your former fiancé has been asking questions all along the stagecoach route. Seems determined to find you. She patted Alina's arm. Don't fret too much. You're Wade Thompson's wife now, and everyone in 3 counties knows Wade would move heaven and earth to protect what's his. The knowledge that Edward was potentially on her trail unsettled Alina deeply, but she decided not to confront Wade immediately. He had his reasons for keeping this from her, and she trusted him enough to wait for him to share when he felt the time was right. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Alina working on mending while Wade read aloud from a new book of poetry, she studied her husband's face in the flickering light. The strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar above his right eyebrow from a childhood accident, the laugh lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled, every detail had become precious to her. "Wade," she said softly when he paused in his reading. He looked up, his expression open. "Yes." "I love you," she said simply. "Whatever comes, whatever troubles find us, I want you to know that." Something in her tone must have alerted him, for he set down the book and moved to kneel beside her chair. "What's troubling you, Alina?" She touched his face gently. "I know about Edward. That he might be looking for me." Wade's expression tightened. "Martha told you," Alina nodded. "Don't be angry with her. She thought I knew." She took his hands in hers. "Why didn't you tell me?" Wade sighed, moving to sit on the ottoman at her feet, still holding her hands. "I didn't want to frighten you, didn't want that man casting a shadow over our happiness." "You think he'll find me?" "Honestly, I don't know. Collins says the trail goes cold in Omaha. Sullivan may have given up by now." Wade's grip tightened slightly. "But if he does find his way here, he'll have me to deal with." "That's what I'm afraid of," Alina admitted. "I don't want you in danger because of me." Wade's expression softened. "Alina, protecting you isn't a burden, it's a privilege." He reached up to touch her cheek. "Besides, this isn't Boston. Out here, a man who raises his hand to a woman finds himself on the wrong end of frontier justice pretty quick." Despite her lingering worry, Alina found comfort in Wade's confidence. "Just promise me you'll be careful." "I've only just found you. I couldn't bear to lose you." "You won't lose me," Wade assured her, rising to pull her into his arms. "That's one promise I intend to keep." November brought the first snow, transforming the prairie into a glistening white landscape. The Thompson ranch stood ready for winter, wood stacked high beside the cabin, cellar full of preserved food, livestock sheltered in the sturdy barn. Inside, the cabin was warm and cozy, with new curtains Alina had sewn, braided rugs on the floors, and the scent of fresh bread often filling the air. As the days grew shorter, Wade and Alina spent more time indoors. They established evening rituals, reading to each other, playing chess, talking about their hopes for the future. Wade spoke of expanding the ranch, perhaps building a larger house in a few years. Alina shared her dream of someday teaching the children of White River, once the town grew enough to support a proper school. "Our children will need education too," Wade remarked one evening, his tone casual though his eyes watched her carefully for a reaction. Alina smiled, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. "They will indeed." Wade caught the gesture, his eyes widening. "Alina, are you?" She nodded, joy bubbling up inside her. "I think so. It's early yet, but I'm almost certain the baby would come in summer around July." Wade was across the room in an instant, gathering her into his arms with a whoop of delight that made her laugh. "A baby, our baby." He kissed her soundly, then drew back with sudden concern. "Are you feeling well? Should you be resting more? Do we need to send for the doctor?" "I'm perfectly fine," Alina assured him, touched by his concern. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, you know. Not my wife, not carrying my child. Wade's hand moved reverently to rest on her still flat stomach. Everything changes now, and it did. Though the changes were subtle at first, Wade became even more protective, insisting Alina rest more and taking on some of her heavier chores. Alina humored him for the most part, understanding his need to care for her, though she drew the line at being treated like an invalid. "I'm with child, not sick," she reminded him when he protested her intention to walk to the creek one snowy afternoon. "Fresh air and exercise are good for me and the baby." Wade conceded the point but insisted on accompanying her, his arm steady around her waist as they navigated the snowy path. The creek was partially frozen, its surface glittering in the winter sunlight. They stood together on the bank, wrapped in the peaceful silence of the snow-covered prairie. "I never thought I could be this happy," Wade said quietly. "After the war, I figured I'd live out my days alone on this ranch, working until I couldn't anymore." "And now," Alina prompted, leaning into his warmth, "now I have everything a man could want. A wife I love more each day, a child on the way, land that's ours to build on." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Thank you for answering my advertisement, Alina Andrews Thompson." "Thank you for promising me that was the last black eye I'd ever have," she replied, "and for keeping that promise." They returned to the cabin hand in hand, their footprints marking a path across the virgin snow, symbols of their journey together, steps toward a future bright with promise. December brought Christmas, the first they would celebrate as husband and wife. Alina decorated the cabin with pine boughs and red ribbons, filled the air with the scent of gingerbread and cinnamon, and secretly worked on a gift for Wade, a new winter coat she sewed from heavy wool, with a warm lining and sturdy buttons. Wade was equally secretive about his gift for Alina, disappearing into the barn for hours at a time when weather permitted, shushing her curiosity with a smile and a kiss. "You'll see on Christmas morning," was all he would say. They attended the Christmas service at the White River Church, joining their neighbors in singing carols and celebrating the holiday. The townsfolk were warm in their greetings, and Alina was touched by how many women discreetly congratulated her on her pregnancy, the news having spread through Martha Henderson's efficient grapevine. Even the gossips who had criticized her in the general store months ago were cordial, one going so far as to press a small, wrapped package into Alina's hands. "Just a little something for the baby," she said awkwardly. "My own 7 were partial to these maple sugar candies when they were teething." Alina thanked her sincerely, understanding this was as close to an apology as she was likely to get. "That's very kind. I'll remember the suggestion." Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, the prairie outside their window a vast expanse of white beneath a clear blue sky. Wade built up the fire while Alina prepared a special breakfast of pancakes and ham. They ate by the light of candles, and the Christmas pine boughs Alina had decorated with ribbons and dried berries. After breakfast, they exchanged gifts. Alina presented Wade with the coat, watching nervously as he examined her handiwork. "It's beautiful," he said, running his fingers over the neat stitching. "Finest coat I've ever owned." He put it on immediately, the fit perfect across his broad shoulders. "Now yours," he said, a hint of boyish excitement in his expression. He disappeared into the bedroom and returned carrying something large covered with a blanket. Setting it carefully before her, he removed the cover to reveal a cradle, beautifully crafted from rich walnut wood. "Wade," Alina breathed, running her fingers over the smooth curves and intricate carvings of leaves and vines that decorated the headboard. "It's exquisite." "Been working on it since you told me about the baby," he explained, pride and a touch of shyness in his voice. My father taught me woodworking when I was a boy. Haven't done much of it in years, but I wanted our child to have something special. Alina rose and went into his arms, tears of happiness spilling down her cheeks. It's perfect. The most beautiful cradle I've ever seen. I thought we could put it here by the fire for now, Wade said, stroking her back as she leaned against him. And when the baby's a bit older, I'll build a proper crib for the bedroom. Alina looked up at her husband, this man who had welcomed her with her bruises and fears, who had given her safety and then love, who now prepared so tenderly for their child. I love you, Wade Thompson, she said, with all my heart. And I love you, Alina Thompson, he replied, bending to kiss her. More than I have words to tell. Winter settled in earnest after Christmas, with frigid temperatures and occasional blizzards that kept them homebound for days at a time. These periods of isolation became treasured moments for Wade and Alina. Time to talk and plan, to read and rest, to simply be together without the constant demands of ranch work. Alina's pregnancy progressed, her body changing as the baby grew. Wade watched these changes with wonder and occasional concern, especially when morning sickness plagued her in January. By February, however, she was blooming with health, her cheeks rosy and her eyes bright despite the winter confinement. They had just entered March, with its promise of eventual spring, when the trouble they had half forgotten arrived at their door. It began with a seemingly ordinary trip to White River for supplies. The day was cold but clear, the snow-covered trail easily navigable with their sled. Alina, now visibly pregnant at 5 months, was eager for the outing after weeks of being largely homebound. Wade helped her into the sled, wrapping buffalo robes around her for warmth before climbing in beside her and taking the reins. The horses moved forward, their breath forming clouds in the cold air as they pulled the sled smoothly over the packed snow. White River was bustling with activity when they arrived, townsfolk taking advantage of the clear weather to conduct business and socialize. Wade helped Alina down from the sled, his hand protective at her elbow as they made their way to the general store. Mrs. Bennett greeted them warmly, exclaiming over Alina's growing belly and asking after her health. Wade left Alina to her shopping and female conversation, while he went to discuss a cattle matter with John Henderson at the livery stable. Alina was examining bolts of fabric for baby clothes when the store's bell jingled, announcing a new arrival. She paid little attention until a familiar voice froze the blood in her veins. I'm looking for a woman named Alina Andrews. I have information that she arrived in this town some months ago. Alina turned slowly, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. Edward Sullivan stood at the counter, as impeccably dressed as ever in an expensive coat and hat. His hair was streaked with more gray than she remembered, and lines of dissipation marked his once handsome face, but his cold blue eyes were unchanged. Mrs. Bennett glanced from Edward to Alina, her expression sharpening with concern. Can't say I know anyone by that name, sir, she lied smoothly. Perhaps you're thinking of another town. Edward's mouth tightened with impatience. I've followed her trail from Boston to here. I know she arrived by stagecoach last spring. He produced a daguerreotype, the same one Alina had sent to Wade in her letters. This is she. Perhaps you know her by another name now. Mrs. Bennett barely glanced at the image. Sorry, mister, can't help you. Edward's frustration was visible, but before he could press further, he caught sight of Alina standing frozen by the fabric display. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the width of the store. Then recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by a cold smile that made Alina's skin crawl. Alina, he said, taking a step toward her. At last, Mrs. Bennett moved quickly around the counter. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave my store. Edward ignored her, his attention fixed on Alina. "You look different." His gaze dropped to her pregnant belly, his expression hardening. "I see you've been busy in my absence." Alina found her voice at last. "What do you want, Edward?" "Why, to bring you home, of course." His tone was light, conversational, but Alina recognized the dangerous undertone. "Your parents are beside themselves with worry, and I've been very patient, waiting for you to come to your senses." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Alina said firmly, one hand moving protectively to her stomach. "I'm married now. This is my home." Edward's face darkened with anger. "Married to some frontier nobody," he scoffed. "Whatever arrangement you've made here can be easily dissolved. You belong in Boston, with me." "She belongs exactly where she is," came Wade's voice from the doorway. Alina had never been so relieved to see her husband. Wade stood tall in the entrance, his presence filling the small store. His expression was calm, but Alina could see the dangerous glint in his eyes as he assessed Edward Sullivan. "And you are?" Edward asked dismissively. "Wade Thompson, Alina's husband." Wade moved to stand beside Alina, his arm going around her waist. "And you must be Sullivan." Edward's eyes narrowed at Wade's obvious knowledge of him. "I've come to take Alina home." "She is home," Wade replied evenly. "Mrs. Bennett, would you mind stepping outside and finding Sheriff Collins? Tell him we have a situation here." The shopkeeper nodded and slipped out the door, leaving the three of them alone in the store. The tension was palpable. Edward's refined city manners barely containing his rage, Wade's frontier directness masking a deadly seriousness. "Let me make something clear, Mr. Sullivan," Wade said, his voice low and controlled. "Alina is my wife. That child she's carrying is my son or daughter. There is nothing for you here." Edward's lip curled in contempt. "You think a hastily arranged frontier marriage means anything?" "I can have it invalidated as soon as we return to Boston. Alina was promised to me first." "I broke that promise," Alina said firmly. "I left you, Edward. I chose to leave. After I spent a year molding you into a proper wife." Edward's facade of civility cracked, revealing the cruelty beneath. "After I invested time and money in your family, in you, you think you can just run away from your obligations?" Wade's arm tightened around Alina. The only obligation she had was to herself, to get away from a man who used his fists instead of words. Edward's gaze flicked to Alina's face, to the place where his last blow had left its mark, now long healed. She was willful, needed correction. The calm mask Wade had maintained slipped, revealing a flash of the anger beneath. "Correction? Is that what you call leaving bruises on a woman's face? I wouldn't expect someone like you to understand the complexities of Boston society," Edward replied coldly. "Alina knows her place." "Don't you, my dear?" Before Alina could answer, the door opened and Sheriff Collins entered, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. "Everything all right in here, Wade?" Mrs. Bennett seemed concerned. "This man," Wade said, nodding toward Edward, "is Edward Sullivan from Boston. He seems to be under the impression that my wife belongs to him." The sheriff assessed the situation with a lawman's experienced eye. "That's so, mister. You claiming Mrs. Thompson here is somehow yours?" Edward straightened, adopting the authoritative tone that had served him well in Boston business circles. "Alina Andrews was engaged to me before she fled Boston under confusing circumstances. I've come to escort her home and clear up this unfortunate situation." "Her name is Alina Thompson now," Sheriff Collins said mildly. "Has been since September, legally married in the church right down the street, witnessed by half the town, including myself." He turned to Alina. "Mrs. Thompson, do you wish to go with this gentleman?" "No," Alina said firmly. "I left Boston of my own free will. I broke my engagement to Mr. Sullivan before I left. I am happily married to Wade and carrying his child." She met Edward's gaze directly. "There is nothing for me in Boston, Edward. Nothing." Sheriff Collins nodded. "Seems clear enough to me." He turned to Edward. "Mr. Sullivan, I suggest you move along. There's a stage leaving for Sioux Falls tomorrow morning. I recommend you be on it." Edward's face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. You can't possibly—" "I can and I will," the sheriff interrupted calmly. "This is White River, Mr. Sullivan, not Boston. Out here, when a woman says she doesn't want to go with a man, that's the end of the discussion. Now you can leave peacefully or you can spend the night in my jail. Your choice." For a moment, Edward looked like he might continue to argue. Then his gaze moved from the sheriff to Wade, whose stance had subtly shifted, ready for whatever might come next. Something in Wade's expression, the absolute certainty that he would do whatever was necessary to protect Alina, seemed to penetrate Edward's anger. "This isn't over," Edward said finally, his voice cold. "A woman can't just run away from her commitments." "She didn't run from commitment," Wade replied quietly. "She ran from abuse. There's a difference." Edward's jaw tightened, but he made no further argument. With a final, venomous look at Alina, he turned and stalked out of the store. Sheriff Collins followed him to the door, then turned back to Wade and Alina. "I'll keep an eye on him until he leaves town. Don't you worry." "Thank you, Sheriff," Wade said, shaking the man's hand. When they were alone again, Alina sagged against Wade, the confrontation leaving her drained and shaking. "I never thought he would actually find me," she whispered. Wade held her close, his hand stroking her back in soothing circles. "It's over now. He knows you're married, settled. He won't bother you again." Alina wished she could be as certain. She knew Edward Sullivan knew his pride, his determination, his refusal to accept defeat. But she kept these doubts to herself, not wanting to worry Wade further. They finished their shopping quickly, the encounter with Edward casting a shadow over what should have been a pleasant outing. As they loaded their purchases into the sled, Alina noticed Wade scanning the street, his expression vigilant. "You think he'll leave?" she asked as they prepared to depart. Wade helped her into the sled before answering. "Sheriff Collins will make sure of it. But just to be safe, we'll stay at the Hendersons tonight. I don't want to risk the journey home with Sullivan possibly still in the area." Alina nodded, relieved at Wade's caution. The Hendersons welcomed them warmly, Martha fussing over Alina's condition and insisting she rest after the day's excitement. John and Wade spent the evening discussing what to do if Edward didn't leave town as ordered. Man like that, used to getting his way, might not take kindly to being told no, John observed as the women prepared tea in the kitchen. Wade nodded grimly. "That's my concern. Collins is a good man, but he can't watch Sullivan every minute." "You know the Riley boys, and I will help keep an eye out," John assured him. "Word's already spreading about what happened at the store. No one in White River wants to see Alina troubled by this fellow." "I appreciate that," Wade said sincerely. "I just want to get her home safely tomorrow, with the baby coming this summer." He trailed off, the concern for his wife and unborn child evident in his voice. John clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't you worry, we take care of our own in White River. Always have." That night, Alina slept fitfully in the Hendersons' guest room, despite Wade's reassuring presence beside her. Her dreams were troubled by Edward's cold eyes and threatening words. Each time she woke, Wade was there, his arm around her, his voice soft as he soothed her back to sleep. Morning brought word from Sheriff Collins. Edward Sullivan had taken the early stage to Sioux Falls, just as suggested. The sheriff had personally seen him board the coach and watched it depart. "Good riddance," Martha declared as she served breakfast. "The nerve of that man, thinking he could just show up and claim a married woman. Alina smiled at Martha's indignation but remained quieter than usual. Though Edward had left White River, she couldn't shake the feeling that the threat he represented hadn't truly passed. Wade noticed her preoccupation during their journey home. "What's troubling you?" he asked as the horses pulled the sled smoothly over the snow. "Sullivan's gone. He can't hurt you anymore." Alina sighed, her breath forming a cloud in the cold air. "I know Edward. He doesn't give up easily, especially when his pride is involved." She turned to face her husband. "I'm afraid he might come back, Wade, or try to cause trouble some other way." Wade's expression was solemn as he considered her words. "If he does, we'll face it together. But for now, let's focus on what's certain. We're together, we're happy, and in a few months, we'll welcome our child." His hand found hers beneath the buffalo robe. "That's what matters, Alina, not Edward Sullivan and his wounded pride." Alina squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his certainty. "You're right. This is our life, not his." The ranch looked peaceful when they arrived home, smoke rising from the chimney where Martha had sent one of her sons ahead to light a fire for their return. The familiar sight of their cabin nestled against the backdrop of winter, bare cottonwoods filled Alina with a sense of belonging that Boston had never given her. This was home. This was where she belonged, and she wouldn't let Edward Sullivan's ghost haunt her happiness. Spring came slowly to the Dakota Territory, the snow melting in fits and starts throughout April, revealing the dormant prairie beneath. Alina's pregnancy advanced, her body growing more unwieldy as the baby within her grew and strengthened. Wade watched her with a mixture of awe and concern, insisting on taking over more of her chores as her condition progressed. "I'm pregnant, not helpless," she reminded him when he tried to prevent her from hanging laundry on the line one mild May morning. "Humor me," Wade replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "It gives me peace of mind." Alina relented, understanding that his protectiveness came from love. And truth be told, as her July due date approached, she found herself grateful for his assistance with the more strenuous tasks. As spring turned to early summer, they heard nothing more from Edward Sullivan. Occasional letters from Sheriff Collins in White River confirmed that the man had not returned to town. Gradually, Alina allowed herself to believe that perhaps Edward had truly accepted defeat and returned to Boston. June brought long, sunny days and the final preparations for the baby's arrival. Wade finished the promised crib, as beautiful as the cradle he'd made for Christmas, and placed it in their bedroom. Alina sewed tiny garments and blankets, sometimes sitting on the porch in the evening, her needle flashing in the golden light as Wade read to her from one of their books. "What shall we name the baby?" Wade asked one such evening, setting aside his book to watch her work. Alina considered the question, her hand resting on her swollen belly where the baby kicked vigorously. "If it's a boy, perhaps William, after your brother." Wade's eyes softened with emotion. "I'd like that. And if it's a girl, Rose, after my grandmother," Alina suggested. "Rose Thompson has a nice sound to it, don't you think?" "William or Rose Thompson," Wade said, trying the names on his tongue. "Perfect either way." The baby seemed to agree, delivering a particularly strong kick that made Alina laugh. "I think this child will have your determination, Wade." "Never stops moving." Wade moved from his chair to kneel beside hers, placing his hand on her belly to feel the baby's movements. "Strong and stubborn," he agreed with a smile. "Like both parents." Alina covered his hand with hers, savoring this quiet moment of connection. After Edward's appearance in White River, she had feared that the shadow of her past would forever darken their future. But here, in the gentle evening light, with Wade's hand warm beneath hers and their child moving between them, she felt only peace and anticipation. July arrived with a heat wave that left Alina uncomfortable and restless. Dr. Wilson from White River visited the ranch to check on her progress, pronouncing her healthy but advising rest in the hottest part of the day. Wade was even more attentive, constantly bringing her cool drinks and fanning her when the air grew still and heavy. "You're going to wear yourself out before the baby even arrives," Alina told him fondly as he adjusted the pillows behind her back for the third time that morning. "I'm fine," Wade assured her. "Just want to make sure you're comfortable." Alina captured his hand, pressing a kiss to his palm. "I am. Except for being as big as a house and unable to see my own feet," Wade chuckled, sitting beside her on the bed. "You're beautiful. Most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Alina's eyes, a common occurrence these days, with her emotions as unwieldy as her body. "You might be the only man in Dakota Territory who thinks a woman 9 months gone with child is beautiful." "Then every other man is blind," Wade declared, bending to kiss her. 2 days later, in the early hours of a hot July morning, Alina woke to a cramping sensation in her lower back. She lay still for a moment, waiting to see if it would return. When it did, several minutes later, she gently shook Wade awake. "I think the baby's coming," she whispered. Wade was instantly alert, sitting up and lighting the lamp beside their bed. "Are you sure? Should I ride for the doctor now?" "Not yet," Alina advised, remembering what Martha Henderson had told her about first babies often taking their time. "The pains are still far apart. Let's wait until they're closer together." Wade nodded, though his expression betrayed his anxiety. He helped Alina walk around the cabin as she had been instructed to do, supporting her through each contraction as they gradually grew stronger and closer together. By mid-morning, it was clear that the baby was indeed coming, and Wade rode to the Henderson farm to send their eldest son for Dr. Wilson. Martha returned with Wade, her experienced presence a comfort to both of them as Alina's labor progressed. "You're doing wonderfully," Martha assured her, wiping Alina's forehead with a cool cloth. "Everything is proceeding just as it should." The hours blurred together as Alina's world narrowed to the rhythm of contractions and the brief respites between. Wade never left her side, his strong hands supporting her, his voice a constant reassurance in her ear. Dr. Wilson arrived in the early afternoon, his calm presence adding another layer of security to the birthing room. "Not long now," he announced after examining Alina. "The baby's positioned perfectly. A few more good pushes should do it." Alina gathered her remaining strength, Wade's encouragement giving her the courage to push through the most intense pain she had ever experienced. And then, with a final, monumental effort, their child slipped into the world, announcing its arrival with a lusty cry that filled the cabin. "A boy," Dr. Wilson declared, quickly cleaning and wrapping the infant before placing him on Alina's chest. "A fine, healthy son." Alina stared down at the tiny, red face, overcome with a love so powerful it took her breath away. "William," she whispered, touching his downy head with trembling fingers. "William Thompson." Wade's face was wet with tears as he leaned close, one arm around Alina, the other hand gently touching his son's cheek. "Hello, William," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Welcome to the world, son." The next hours passed in a haze of exhausted joy. Dr. Wilson and Martha helped clean up while Wade sat beside Alina, who held their son as he nursed for the first time. When everything was settled, Martha and the doctor left with promises to return the following day, leaving the new family to their private happiness. That night, as moonlight streamed through the bedroom window, Wade sat in a chair beside the bed, holding William while Alina rested. The baby slept peacefully in his father's strong arms, his tiny face relaxed in complete trust. He's perfect, Wade whispered, gazing down at his son in wonder. 10 fingers, 10 toes, strong lungs. He looks like you, Alina observed sleepily. Same chin. Wade smiled, carefully adjusting the blanket around William. Poor kid. Alina laughed softly. He's fortunate to have your strength, your kindness. She reached out to touch Wade's arm. You're going to be a wonderful father. Wade's eyes met hers, filled with love and gratitude. And you're already an amazing mother. He glanced down at their sleeping son. I never thought I'd have this a family of my own. After the war I was so broken, didn't think I deserved happiness. And now, Alina prompted. Now I know better, Wade replied. Because of you, Alina, you taught me how to trust, how to love again. Alina felt tears well in her eyes. And you taught me that not all men use their strength to hurt. Some use it to protect, to build, to love. She smiled through her tears. We've healed each other, Wade. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then he rose carefully, placed William in the cradle he had crafted with such care, and returned to sit on the edge of the bed beside Alina. I promise you this, he said, taking her hand in his. I will spend every day of my life making sure you and William are safe and happy. Whatever comes, whatever challenges we face, we'll face them together. Together, Alina agreed, squeezing his hand. That's all I want, Wade. All I'll ever need. As William slept peacefully in his cradle, Wade stretched out beside Alina on the bed, drawing her gently into his arms. Together they drifted toward sleep, secure in the knowledge that the love they had built was strong enough to withstand whatever the future might bring. 5 years later, the Thompson Ranch had changed in the years since William's birth. The cabin had been expanded to include 2 more bedrooms, one for William, now a sturdy 5-year-old with his father's determined chin and his mother's blue eyes, and one for 3-year-old Rose, whose dark curls and mischievous smile had Wade wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. The ranch itself had grown as well. Wade had purchased adjacent land when it became available, expanding their holdings to 30 acres. The cattle herd had doubled, and a new barn stood proudly beside the original. A white picket fence now surrounded Alina's garden, which had grown to include not only vegetables, but a profusion of flowers that bloomed from spring through fall. Most significantly, a small schoolhouse had been built on the edge of their property, where Alina taught the children of neighboring ranches 3 days each week. It was a dream realized, one that Wade had encouraged from the moment Alina had mentioned her desire to teach again. Mama. Papa's home, William called, running into the kitchen where Alina was preparing supper, Rose toddling behind him. Alina wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window, smiling as she saw Wade riding toward the house, his tall figure straight and strong in the saddle. After 5 years of marriage, the sight of him still made her heart beat faster. Can we go meet him? Please, William begged, already reaching for the door. Stay in the yard, Alina cautioned as she released them to run outside. Through the window, she watched as Wade dismounted and caught both children in his arms, swinging them around as they shrieked with delight. The love on his face as he listened to their excited chatter was something Alina never tired of seeing. When they came inside, Wade bent to kiss Alina, his lips warm against hers. Missed you, he murmured. You were only gone a few hours, she replied with a smile. Too long, Wade said, kissing her again before allowing the children to drag him to the table to see the pictures they had drawn that afternoon. Later, after the children were tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Wade and Alina sat on the porch in the gathering twilight, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. The prairie stretched before them, painted in shades of purple and gold by the setting sun. "I got a letter from Sheriff Collins today," Wade said, his tone carefully casual. "Thought you should know." Alina tensed slightly. "About Edward?" Wade nodded, his arm tightening around her. "He died 3 months ago in Boston. Heart failure." Alina was silent for a long moment, absorbing the news. Edward Sullivan had never returned to White River after that day in the general store, but his shadow had occasionally touched their happiness over the years in Alina's occasional nightmares, in Wade's watchfulness whenever they traveled to town. "Are you all right?" Wade asked gently. "Yes," Alina said and meant it. "I don't wish death on anyone, but I can't deny it's a relief to know he's gone." Wade pressed a kiss to her temple. "That chapter of your life is truly closed now." Alina nodded, turning to look at her husband in the fading light. The years had added a few silver threads to his hair and deepened the lines around his eyes, but to her, he was more handsome than ever, his face bearing the marks of a life lived with purpose and love. "Thank you," she said softly. Wade looked puzzled. "For what?" "For keeping your promise. The day I arrived with that black eye, you promised it would be my last. And it was." She touched his face gently. "You showed me what real love looks like, Wade. Not possession or control, but partnership and respect." Wade turned his head to kiss her palm. "You deserved nothing less," he said simply. "Still do." As darkness settled over the prairie, they sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft breathing of their children through the open windows. Alina thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a frightened, bruised bride to be fleeing Boston to a confident woman who had found love, family, and purpose on the Dakota frontier. The black eye she had arrived with had long since healed, leaving no visible mark. The internal scars had healed too, replaced by the strength and joy she had found with Wade. "What are you thinking?" Wade asked, noticing her contemplative mood. Alina smiled up at him. "That I'm thankful for mail-order advertisements and for cowboys who keep their promises." Wade chuckled, pulling her closer. "And I'm thankful for brave women who travel across the country for a fresh start." He kissed her, slow and sweet. "I love you, Alina Thompson. Today, tomorrow, always." "I love you too," Alina replied, her heart full to bursting. "Today, tomorrow, always." As the first stars appeared in the night sky, they rose together and went inside, closing the door on the darkness. In the warmth of the home they had built together, surrounded by evidence of their love and commitment, Alina knew with absolute certainty that Wade's promise had given her more than safety. It had given her the chance to discover what real happiness felt like. And that was a gift beyond measure.